Hey, how's it going? John Shishilla here, home inspector, contractor, licensed roofer, an inspector here in Florida. And I want to give a brief comments or thoughts about hiring an inspector. So let's just say you're a home buyer, you're buying a house, and now you have to find a home inspector, or maybe you're looking for a house and you're worrying about like, all right, how do I find a home inspector? How do I find a good home inspector? Well, there's a couple things. A, the first one's obvious. Your realtor could give you, or an agent could give you a recommendation. And that's probably one of the easiest and best ways to find a home inspector. The issue there is not every agent wants you to have the best inspection. And, we hear in our industry all the time, and you hear it from agents all the time. This guy's a deal killer. That's what they call us when, we write up stuff they don't like. And there are inspectors that are definitely deal killers, meaning they write up a lot of stuff that maybe not needed, extra fluff kind of stuff. So you want to avoid that at times. You don't want an inspector who's overly critical of a house, and it's okay if they are, but you want to be able to take that into context. Meaning, not every house is new, not every house is perfect. Even a new house isn't perfect. We take a bunch of materials, put them together that are imperfect materials, and try to make a perfect house. Just doesn't work. So nothing's ever perfect. So start off with understanding that is your house is not perfect. It never will be. It just can't be. I've yet, been doing this for about 20 years, and I've yet to find a perfect house. I'm a licensed home builder in the state of Florida, residential contractor, certified general contractor, and a licensed roofer. And I've never found a perfect house, and I've never had a perfect inspection. So let's start with that. And, if you do take the recommendations of your realtor, what you should do is also do a little research, see what kind of a job that inspector does, compare it to other inspectors, other inspection companies in the area. And why is that? Well, you want to know what kind of inspector you're getting. So there's inspectors in my area, very, very knowledgeable. And I'll tell you a quick story is a lot of agents would tell me their buyers don't buy the first, when they use this inspector, they call him a deal killer, or, I have other names for him, but I won't get into those, but call him a deal killer because they're overly critical. And what happens is the buyer finds a house. This inspector does an inspection. I'm using a specific inspector as an example, and they don't buy it. Then they look at another house. They don't buy it. And then by the third house, they kind of get the idea that this inspector he puts down a lot of information and complains about a lot of stuff. And the problem with that is it's an extreme, meaning the first house might have been a perfect house for them and had some flaws like any other house, like the third house, but they just the home buyer just becomes realizes that this is the what I'm in the market I'm in, this is what I'm going to find, and this is what happens. But by this time they may have spent money on first, second, maybe on a third inspection or even more. So you kind of need to have an idea what that inspector's reputation is, right? So if you have that deal killer on one end of the spectrum, then you also have the other end where you have we call them cheap Charlies or quick inspections or drive-by inspections, meaning they don't really write a lot of substance in their inspections. Meaning, again, there might be some information in there, but a lot of it may be irrelevant. A lot of it may be just filled with fluff that's not useful. So on both those, seeing one of the reports or several of the reports ahead of time is probably going to be very helpful to you. And that way you can kind of understand what you're looking at, and you can kind of balance it, because you don't want really either one. You have somebody who doesn't do you justice by giving you the details you need, and then you have one who's overwhelming you with details you really don't need, or calling out things that are just probably not a big deal. We all know, we've all lived in homes where there's certain things wrong and we just dealt with it. Our cars are the same way. Yeah, there's a scratch over here, there's a little ding over there. Yeah, it's not new. That's the way it's going to be. Um, so that's kind of the two extremes you want to maybe avoid. But if you're going to use one of those, which is nothing wrong with them, just understand what you're getting for your money. All right. And one obviously is probably cheaper. The other one may justify their rates by how much detail and effort they put into an inspection, which is great. It's absolutely fantastic. The problem is if you overwhelm a buyer, and I say this as an inspector who's been doing this for many years, a lot of times on a first-time home buyer, especially, I'll do the inspection and we'll be going over stuff, and we just watch them get glazed over as we're going over it because it's just too much, and we have to reel it in and then just really kind of give them the finer details, like what's good, what's bad, and move on, so they can kind of make an informed decision without overwhelming them. Right now, when you do hire your inspector, always discuss the results with your agent because they can put some things in context. And then when you have questions, you can also ask the inspector, follow up with them. I find a lot of times, people may buy a house, we do the inspection, we send over the report, they may not even look at it. So read the report, follow up with questions, not with just the inspector, but with your agent to kind of get, is this what I should expect for the age of home I'm buying in the location I'm buying and the price point I'm buying, because those all make a difference. Understand this: a person built the house, a person can fix the house. Nothing is not fixable in a house for them almost ever. I don't think I've ever seen a house that was not fixable. Um, it's just how much time, effort, or money is going to take to fix those things, and at what in what rate and what how fast does it need to be done? Like in Florida, we're required to report things that are at or near the end of the useful life. So if you have a 10-year-old AC unit, say in Florida, it's probably going to say it's at or near the end of its useful life. And that verbiage comes directly from the licensing law. And it says, yes, we have to report it as such. But a lot of times we won't give you an estimate if it's newer. We won't say how long it's going to last. We'll just tell you the year, that kind of stuff. But we have to report it if it's at or near the useful end of its life, or if it's not working as intended. So when you realize those two things, a lot of the cosmetic stuff doesn't really need to be in a home inspection, and really technically shouldn't be. But people like to know it, so a lot of inspectors, myself included, have a tendency to put some of that stuff in the report just so they could see it that way, so they can understand. Well, I'm going to have to do that, and I'm standing here in my office, and I have bifolding closet doors across the room, and they're uneven. Now, would that make a report on a 30-year-old house? No. It might drive you nuts if you got OCD. It's driving me nuts right now. But on a new house, yeah, that's probably should be adjusted because it's a new house. It should be right when you start. So you have to kind of take the balance in those things. So is it a hard fix? No, it's a very easy fix. Is it a big deal? No, but you should know that. Okay. Um, Things sometimes that may go in a report that you may realize, okay, I bought a 30-year-old house and my windows are original. Well, the windows are probably going to have some issues and they might need some work, a little TLC cleaning, maybe some repairing or general replacement. But none of that may be absolutely necessary if the windows work. I'll use the sliding glass door as a perfect example. We write it up almost all the time, clean and lubricate the track, repair as needed. Because sliding glass doors, if you've ever had them, over the years, they get dirty, they get rough, they have a hard time opening, and nobody really takes them off the track, cleans the rollers, replaces the rollers, and they should, because it's used, it's a back door, it's probably used quite often. So, is that a hard fix? No. Is it a big deal? No. Does it need to be fixed? Well, if it's a new house, you would expect it to be working properly. So again, you're going to take it into account what you're buying, where you're buying it, how old it is, that kind of thing. And then, of course, you're going to take into account what's important to you. Do you want a turnkey ready house? I mean, if you want a house that has no flaws, you want to move and don't have to do anything, well, then you probably need to look more towards a new construction or very new construction. So, when you take the advice of your agent, again, check out the reputation of the inspection company. Check it, look at the report so you know what to expect when you get an inspection from them, and ask them if this is a typical house. Ask them for a report typical of what you're going to buy. A good inspector will have lots of reports they can send you. They'll just scrub the data, like the people's name and address off it, and send it over to you as an example. We do that occasionally for people, and it's very helpful. That way, when you get your report, you're not overwhelmed. Remember this: you're going through an exciting time. You're going to be looking at homes. You're going to be excited about it. You're not going to see the stuff we see when you walk through the house in a 20 minutes to an hour, even on a second visit. You're not going to see some of that stuff. We will. That's why we're there. That's why we get hired. So you're going to want to make sure that, you understand that before, when you put in your offer for one, the age of the house and price of that stuff, again, stuff to talk to your agent about. And then when you schedule your inspection, you may ask for, comments or reports, and then ask the inspector's opinion. A lot of times we don't give an opinion, but most people don't realize in Florida, especially, home inspectors are hired for their opinion on the condition of the house. It doesn't mean it's fact. It means it's an opinion. And so a home inspector may say, yeah, this needs to be painted. And somebody else may say, well, no, it doesn't. Well, that's an opinion. Now in Florida, I bring up paint because we write it up a lot if the paint is old, faded, or chalky, and it needs to be replaced, because in Florida, the paint is a waterproofing. and that waterproofing is needed. So in other parts of the country where you're in a dry environment, it might not matter that much. So, again, where the house is, age of the house is going to make a difference. If you have a really old house that's been painted a couple dozen times, chalky paint's probably not the end of the world. But if it's a new house, well, you're probably, and the paint's going out, say it's 5, 7 years old, you probably need to plan on painting it in Florida anyway. So it the conditions vary, and I guess that's my point. There is understand what you're going to get, so you understand what you should expect, and then see if it aligns with your expectations. Because no house is perfect. So now you've picked either this really tough inspector who's great, has a lot of knowledge, but going to give you overwhelming with information. That's okay. That's good to have if you're somebody who likes that information. We get engineers a lot of times and doctors that want all that extra information put in the report. They want to know. And then you get, again, new home buyers, maybe a younger buyer that's never owned a home, and it's just overwhelming to them. So understand where you're at, and then always check out the reputation of the inspector. And I said that you could check out, obviously Google reviews is the first one, reviews, referrals, anything like that would be helpful. Is it always worth it to take your agent's agent's referral? Not always. We do see a lot of agents, not a lot, but we do see some agents, not a lot we work with, where they just want the deal done. So if you have an agent that's really just wants the deal to close, and we have agents walk up to us and go, "Hey, make sure this happens. I need this to close. I need to make my mortgage payment." They're not looking out for your best interest. So I would rewind this whole thing and say, if you're going to hire an agent, hire one you trust, hire one you believe in. It's just not going to be somebody randomly, because they're going to help you find some of these things and help you pick an inspector. And you should be listening to their recommendation if you trust them. So, and you should be hiring an agent you trust. Same thing with an inspector. So don't be afraid to call around, talk to a few inspectors, say, "Hey, I want to talk to the inspector. I want to have a conversation with them," kind of get a feeling for them. Look at their skill set. Now, in the state of Florida, we only have to take a 120-hour class and pass a test. And most people can do that without a problem. It doesn't mean they have a lot of construction background. It doesn't mean they understand a lot of things. And I will tell you from experience, working many years, inspectors that do that without any construction background, not impossible, but it takes them a little longer to get proficient at the job. So maybe you want to ask them how long they've been in the position, how long they've been doing the job. Again, somebody who was a home builder beforehand may be perfect at it, but you really want to make sure that you are getting an inspector that you trust, you believe in, and you understand how far they're going to go for you. And again, you can go too far, and you can go not far enough. There's both of those can happen, and we see it all the time. I read reports all the time where it's just fluff. It's just some of them have referrals for contractors in there, or maintenance tips, things like that. Some of that is helpful. Too much of that is just too much. So if you're going to look for your own inspector, again, reviews, time in business, look at their license number. Now, it's interesting, in the state of Florida, we go license number 1 all the way up to we're at 18,000. And if you look at their license number, you kind of have an idea right away how long they've been in business. And in Florida, you can look up myfloridalicense.com, and you can see whether they have any complaints on their license, things like that. Now, fortunately for home inspectors in Florida, we don't get a lot of complaints on our licenses, but that would be one thing you could check. There's some that are, have some, a couple, but for the most part, those people don't want to stay in business. So, but and then price. Obviously, you're going to look at price. You're going to look at, and then what else they can do. So, price for a home inspection is pretty simple, but in Florida, when you start adding other things to the inspection, the price goes up quite a bit. A typical home inspection, a few $100, $400 or $500, no problem. But then you add a wind mitigation in, you need a 4-point inspection, you need a WDO. So you might want a source scope if you have an older home. You might want mold testing. So ask your inspector what they recommend you do. Ask your agent what they recommend you do. I have an agent who recommends on an old house all the time to get a source scope, because he knows that we can't see the sewer lines underground unless there's a scope done. And if there's a scope done, they find something wrong. You may not need to fix it right away, but he can use that as a negotiation tool to help you get a lower price in the house. So when you do have to replace it, it's really you didn't pay for it in the house and then have to fix it anyway. So He laughs. He says, he goes, you have a 50s house, 60s house, do a source scope. I'll save you 10 grand. He goes, it's the best investment you'll ever make. We'll show him the video and you'll take 10 grand off the price. And I laugh because he's one of my best source scope salesmen. And he's not wrong, because 95% of the time we put a source scope in there. Others, this wrong, that wrong. It's got to be in your place in a few years, or it's done. And, so in that case, it's better to know it's done now than after you move in. Now you got to cut open your floor to fix your sewer lines. So better off that way. Also, look at their licenses, meaning home inspectors aren't always licensed for everything. If they're doing, like, say, a WDO inspection, are they a pest control company? Because in Florida, you have to be a pest control company in order to do that. Or do they just sub it out, kind of thing? Septic inspections in Florida, you have to be a plumber or a septic company. So most home inspectors in Florida don't do septic inspections. Can they sub it out? Yes. In other states, it's a different ballgame. So you need to know the rules of your state. Again, start with your agent. Ask them, what should I be looking for? What should I be doing? What inspections should I get? Now, I will say this, a lot of people say, well, I don't have a lot of money, this and that. The problem with that is you're going to spend money on inspections. So you only want to do it once if you can. And not to say it doesn't happen. We've had clients that did 2, 3 inspections. We show up and there's problems, and we usually work with them on price and the future inspections. But um, you really need to get everything you need for that house. And unfortunately, in Florida, you're probably going to need a wind mitigation. You're probably going to need a 4-point on something that's a little older, and that could vary from 10 years old to 40 years old, depending on the insurance company. But it's usually cheaper to get it while they're there because they don't have to come back out. So you get your 4-point inspection, and then you get your home inspection, of course. If it has septic, almost always you should get a septic inspection. That, again, you talk to your agent. That can give you some names of companies. Talk to your home inspector. You might be able to refer somebody, he or she. So those are questions you probably should lay out before you find your house. So you kind of have an idea of what you're looking at, and maybe even ask your agent, say, hey, where do the prices go for my area? What should I be expecting to pay for inspections? Because there's nothing worse than realizing you got to stress over, how you're paying for what you need for inspections. So, like a septic inspection might run you $600, cost you as much as the home inspection. And, so you want to be prepared for that. Then you start adding things in like mold testing or something like that, could add a couple more $100. So, and again, ask your agent, ask the home inspector, hey, would you do this, or do you think it's necessary? And then, of course, while you're at the inspection, before they're done, be there at least at the end. I'm not a big fan of people coming and sitting and watching me do my job, because I don't, I'll pull up the house and go, what do you think of the roof? Well, I haven't looked at the roof yet. Well, what do you think of this? I haven't looked at it yet. So I really can't answer any questions until I start inspecting. And we get that a lot, but, being there at the end to go through it, so you kind of get a feel, so you can look at it if you want, so you can understand it, so you can, so you can feel what the inspector sees and say, okay, I feel good with this. I don't feel good with that. We're going to negotiate this, or we're going to have this fixed, or I'm going to have to fix that the moment I move in. So that's helpful to be there if you can. If not, when you get your report, go over it with the inspector or your agent or both. Reports have a tendency to look worse, and that's just the nature of the business. When you start taking pictures of stuff up close, and when you start putting, disclaimers and things down there, it just makes it feel worse. So don't panic when you read your report, and then call the inspector, have a conversation about it. Again, most of the times, sometimes I see people buy a house and I never talk to them, and then they didn't buy the house. I go, why didn't you buy that house? Oh, well, you said there was a little bit of water damage, on the side, and I would just figure the whole house was flooding, and no, it was just a little bit of water damage. It just had something that needed to be fixed. Maybe it was something as simple as extending the gutter out. For $20, it could have fixed the problem. Or maybe there's just too much mulch against the house. That kind of thing. So, easy fixes, but you really want, those are things you're going to want to address. So, obviously, the big ticket items you may want to even find out beforehand. Like, we get a lot of agents who will call us and say, hey, we got buyers thinking about putting an offer in this house. Can you find out how old the roof is? Because we're not sure, and we're going to put the offer in, but a roof is going to cost us 20 grand, and we don't want to have these people buy it. You come do the inspection, tell them the roof is shot, and now we can't buy it because A, we can't get insurance, or B, we got to replace the roof right after we move in or within a year or two. So maybe that would be reflected in your offer. So if you could find out information ahead of time. So if you have a relationship with an agent who has a relationship with an inspector, or the agent can do it, you can look up permits. You can do it yourself if you really want, but look those up and see how old things are. See when was the last AC permit, and then of course read your disclosures. A lot of times, people didn't see something in a disclosure and then we report it and they're like, whoa, I didn't know. I go, it's right there in the disclosure. We generally, as inspectors, don't read the disclosure. Some may, but we don't. I don't want to go in with a fixed idea what the house is going to be. I'm just going to say, hey, this is what it is what I saw that day, because an inspection is a time and a day, period where it is like this right now. So that being said, a lot of times we'll put a comment in a report that says, hey, the house was occupied. There was a lot of furniture, this or that. Recommend at your walkthrough that you look at all these areas that have been covered. Was there a big China hutch in the way? And then there was a hole in the wall behind it that we couldn't see because there was China hutch in the way. Or was the carpet, destroyed underneath the master bed? We don't know that. And again, carpet's probably cosmetic. A hole in the walls could be cosmetic. But those are the things you're going to want to check at your walkthrough. Maybe you don't even wait till the last day to do your walkthrough. Maybe the buyer's moving out and the seller's moving out. And you go say, hey, we're going to do a walkthrough real quick before, 2 weeks before closing, and make sure everything's cool. Nothing wrong with that. So again, talk to your agent. They can help you through that. If you don't have an agent, talk to your inspector, talk to both. So, finding an inspector is a couple things. A, you want to check their reputation. B, you want to see how long they've been in business, how long they've been doing this. I find some inspectors have been around for years and they've just been doing a mediocre job for many years. Fine. They're getting along just fine. They may even have a decent reputation. But when you see the report, is it what you expect? We find it interesting in the industry because a lot of times there's agents that will use us for their personal purchase or their friend's purchase. But when they have clients, they don't call us. And it tells you everything you need to know. They want the details at one point, or they want our thoroughness, if that's what you want to call it. But they don't want it for their buyers. And I see it, more than I like to admit to. And again, sometimes the inspector has too many details, which overwhelms a buyer, and you don't want that either. So, there's got to be a balance, and sometimes you may need to find the right inspector for the right person. So it's kind of a fair thing. Like, again, if you're going to be gutting the house and repainting and things like that, the cosmetic stuff means nothing, right? But if you want to move in, turnkey ready, move in, do nothing, well, maybe those details mean something more to you. So you kind of have to see that and you kind of have to weigh it because, again, more details can just be more overwhelming. Because I'm going to admit something here that most home inspectors will never miss. We do a lot of inspections where we do an inspection on a house and it doesn't sell for some reason. Sometimes it's nothing had to do with the inspection. Sometimes it's financing. Sometimes it's just the buyer just changed their mind. I've been on inspections where we're doing the inspection. They say, don't even worry about the inspection. I'm going to look at this other house. I'm not buying this house. We're doing the inspection for no reason. And it happens several times a year. And, it kind of puts us in an awkward position with the agents because they're like, well, what was in your report that was so bad? And we don't disclose that information. So, but it does happen. And so, we go back to the house maybe a month later and you find other stuff and you're like, did this show up or was it not visible? Well, sometimes the inspector just sees stuff that they didn't see the first time. So one reason why to my company we send 2 inspectors is because we want to make sure we have time to see those things and time to report on those things. I don't want my inspectors to feel rushed or to get through it and not do a thorough job. But again, part of it's the communication. You can do a thorough job if you communicate it properly and say, hey, this is a no big deal, but I'm letting you know. And I say this story a lot when I'm doing inspections. I say, listen, I'm going to put some stuff in this report. It doesn't mean a whole lot. And I say, because when you move into your house, you're going to sit down on your couch in your living room and go, there's a crack in the ceiling. My inspector didn't tell me. Well, that crack might not mean much. There's cracks in my ceiling in my family room right now. It might not mean a whole lot. But now you're going to think the inspector didn't see it. And that's not a comfortable place to be for anybody. So then you're going to wonder, what else did they miss? So that's one reason why we give you some of these details that may not be necessary. I say a perfect example in new construction. We do a lot of new construction, and I tell my guys to be really picky in the master bathroom water closet. Why? because you're going to sit down and you're going to stare at the wall and you're going to look around. If things don't line up, things are crooked, things are damaged, or the texture's wrong, you're going to see it and it's going to drive you nuts. And you're going to see it every time you go to the bathroom. So there's certain places where you go, yeah, you want to get that right. Why? Because you don't want the builder or the seller to be like, well, they chimped on the drywall guy was a terrible guy, or my trim guy was terrible, or the guy who hung my accessories, my toilet paper roll holder was crooked, or the door was crooked. May not be a big deal. I have crooked doors in my house. May not be a big deal, but nobody wants to look at that, and maybe I'll bother them. So for me as an inspector, I want to be able to read you, and I want to be able to see you, talk to you, and go, okay, do they really need this in the report? Do I need to highlight it? Because they're like, listen, I can't move in this house if the doors are crooked. It'll drive me nuts. And maybe that's something you're going to have fixed, or you're going to want fixed right away, or you're going to ask the builder to fix if it's a new construction, that kind of stuff. So, but other people were like, yeah, okay. I used to live in a 100-year-old house. This is nothing. So, so you got to kind of feel people out and see what they want, what they like. That's that. We're really just checking to see if things working as intended, right? And things that are at or near the useful end of their life, and we're giving you an opinion, and it's our opinion. So I tell inspectors this: we don't even have to be right. It's just our opinion. That's what the state law says. But obviously, with duty of care, we have a standards of practice of things we have to do. That's available if you want to see it. Again, you can go to the state website, myfloridalicense.com, and you can look up the home inspector standards of practice. Many of the associations have one. InterNACHI has one. ASHI has one. I happen to use the state of Florida has one. I happen to use the state of Florida one. And they're all very similar, very little differences in those. But, home inspectors are supposed to follow the standards of practice and report to the standards of practice. So one of the big things we find, again, is home inspectors may not say, hey, we inspected this. It doesn't mean they didn't, but they probably should report it to you and I say that all the times. I will put in a report, inspected, no significant defects found. And it sounds silly because you'll see that many times in a report. Like, and I'll use an example: drywall in the house inspected, no significant defects found. What does that mean? There was no defects in the drywall? No. What it means is nothing was significant that really should be expected. Was there a chip wall in one room? Yeah, maybe. They could have shipped it on the way moving out too. We've had that happen. And then you'll see a lot of pictures. Most home inspectors these days put a lot of pictures, and which extends the report, makes them big, and go, oh, I got this 30, 40, 50, 70-page report. Well, we put pictures of every room, every appliance in our reports. And the reason for it is we found that we wanted to document what was there. And I have one, and we call it a clause we have in there. And it's basically, hey, there was stuff in this room and we can't see behind it. And you probably should look at it before. So whenever a house is occupied or cluttered, we write these additional comments, which just should start setting off some tones like, okay, I need to make sure I'm looking at this because it was covered, things were covered up. If there's anything we can't inspect because there's no access to it, like, if they put, a ping pong table in front of the electrical panel, and they got boxes stacked in front of them, I can't get to it. Well, we didn't inspect it because we can't move the personal items. We don't move personal items because that could be grandma's, vase that, she brought from the old country, and it's, you moved it, and no matter who broke it, you're going to get blamed for it. So we don't move personal items. We don't turn on valves that are not normally operated. We don't turn them off unless they're normally operated, like faucet sinks, tubs, showers, hose bibs, yes, but under the sinks, no. Behind the toilet, no. We don't operate those valves. Why? Because they're probably going to leak if they've been around a while, and it's just the way it is. And we don't want to cause the issues or damage to the house. So, which it does happen sometimes. So we don't operate those kind of things. So those are the kind of things you need to know. And then, of course, knowing we have all these pictures and why they're there, again, pictures of the appliances. We had I had a case one time where we did the inspection, and I get a call after the person moves in, and it's like, oh, my dishwasher doesn't work. I don't know why you didn't tell me. I'm mad, this and that. And okay. And this before I took pictures of all the appliances, and I had pictures of the rooms. And I went to the house to see what was going on with the dishwasher because they were upset. They're just moving in, trying to run the dishwasher. Like, who wouldn't be upset, right? And it wasn't the same dishwasher in the picture of the kitchen. The seller had swapped it out. And Yeah, that wasn't the dishwasher we inspected. So I had another case where we're in a vacant house, and I look at the owner, happened to be there, let us in, and I asked him if the washer and dryer worked and if they were conveying, and he said yes. So again, if it's not conveying, we may not run it. We like to run it anyway, just to make sure everything works, like the water, the drain line, that kind of stuff. But I asked him, I said, washer and dryer work? He goes, oh, absolutely. And we turn on the washer and we go about our business. I happen to go outside, and one of my inspectors, she was inside doing stuff. And as I'm coming around the back of the house, I see her running across the yard, grabbing towels. And I run in the house, and the washing machine's leaking all over the house. And I immediately turned off the water, and I looked at the owner and said, "What's going on?" He goes, "I don't know." I said, "I thought you said it worked." He says, "Well, I thought it did." And I said, "Okay." And he goes, "Well, I took it out of the house we bought and I moved it over here, but I never checked it." I was like, "Well, then you shouldn't have told me you knew it worked. You should have said, 'Hey, I'm not sure.'" We could have hung around. I mean, it wasn't a big deal. It was a tile floor. We cleaned up the water. It was over with. But things like that do happen. So um, the other thing is you want to make sure your inspector is well insured. And I say this because the state of Florida requires very little insurance. We require to carry liability insurance only, meaning if we damage something, our insurance would cover it. But the Farbrock contract requires the seller, the buyer, to return the house in the same condition it was given to them when they started the inspections. And I say this because it comes up, things break. You open a blind, it falls off. It wasn't attached right, it falls down. Had that happen a couple of times. Hit my inspector in the head. Had a breakable lamp one time because it wasn't installed right and it shouldn't fall down. But of course, seller's upset. Now this is complicating your deal. So you want to make sure that your inspector is well insured for liability, but most inspectors are not required to carry errors and omissions insurance. So if they miss something or they forget something or they didn't do part of the inspection, they're not going to be liable for it. They don't have insurance for it, and their insurance will not cover it. So you may be going after an inspector who has little money to pay you if you do win a lawsuit. So errors and omissions insurance, you should ask about it. I will tell you that it sends off some red flags for most inspectors if you ask that right off the bat. But you should ask to say what kind of insurance you got. We carry $2 million and everything. Even our vehicles are covered $2 million. So where other inspectors maybe a million, maybe no errors and omission, maybe only the minimum 300,000 liability. Um, so it's something you want to ask. And the other one you ask if you're a seller is, do they have workers' comp? Because if the inspector falls off your roof, better believe if they don't have workers' comp, they're filing a claim on your homeowner's insurance. And this one gets me because they're doing things in your house, and crawling through the attic, climbing your roof. They should have workers' comp. Now, if you're a small company, you can get exemptions, and most people do get the exemptions because if you're a small company, you probably can't get workers' comp. But that's some question you should know, something you could ask. Very few, only insurance agents ever ask me that question. Hey, you got workers' comp? And I want to see a copy of it before you go on my roof. Smart question. So those are just some things you can ask when you get it, when you're going to look for a home inspector. But if you don't wait till the last minute to look, meaning as you're looking for a house, look for an inspector, someone you can trust. Start a relationship, start a conversation with them. Get an idea what it would cost. Like we have people give me an estimate what it's going to cost to do a home inspection on this type of house. I'm looking in this area, that kind of thing. Get a couple of them, and then go with the one you feel the best about. Of course, look at the reviews, look at, Yelp, maybe one, there's Angie's List, maybe one. We have a lot of reviews on Google, and that's the only one I really work on it. But don't trust reviews 100% either, because there are companies out there will get inspectors' reviews, hundreds of them, for pennies on the dollar kind of thing, and they're all fake. So you might want to read some of them. I tell some people, I said, one of the best things you could do for me is you write me a review, but if you write me a bad review, that's okay. Because most people who write bad reviews usually are scorned for some reason and they're mad. People don't just go out and write bad reviews. And a lot of times may have been nothing. Sometimes we usually offer to fix it. If we mess up, we offer to fix it. We make it better. But we're not perfect. So read their bad reviews. Look how they respond to their bad reviews. You know, look how they respond to their good reviews. Do they pay attention to them? So that's just thing. And referrals. Ask, coworkers. Hey, did you get an inspection? How'd you like that inspector? What'd you like about him? What didn't you like about him? Ask a few coworkers. Ask your coworkers to say, hey, can you send me a copy of that report if you don't want to ask the inspector? And then you'll go into this, informed on what you should be looking for an inspector. Now we have clients that have been using us for years. Their whole family uses us. We had clients 7 years ago. You did my inspection. I want you to do my next one. It's really kind of interesting. Like when we do it, and they're selling their house, and they were our client. Now we're doing for another, for a buyer, and we do the same house a few years later, and we kind of chuckle because they know what's going to happen, and we know what was in the report before, which we generally don't look at, but sometimes we do. And he'll go, yeah, I didn't fix that, or I fixed this and didn't do that. Yeah, okay. But those are the kind of things that you want to look for. And you want to look for inspectors that are going to be a little detailed. They're going to look at things like the shower tiles. Are they going to be loose? How old is the water heater? When was the plumbing updated? How well does the drains work? How much insulation is there? How well is the roof? Is there any loose lifting, torn shingles, that kind of stuff? Those are the kind of things that'll stop a deal, the stop a deal a lot of times just because you can't get insurance unless it's fixed. So, interesting enough, we don't check one of the things that, and this was a little controversial, is smoke detectors. We'll tell you where they are, but I tell you have to change the batteries the day you move in. They're going to turn off the power. It's going to be off for a little bit, and it's going to go on with you. The battery's going to drain, and you're going to want new batteries in there. So just change them and test and test them the day you move in. Curiously enough, when you push the button on a smoke detector, it just says that there's power, the battery works, and the sound thing works. It doesn't really actually test if it's going to work. Right? It's the weirdest thing, but that's the way that is. You can use a smoke test. We do have it. We don't use it very often. But if your smoke detectors are more than 10 years old, we're just going to recommend you replace them because they're 10 years old. That's the manufacturer's instructions. So that may be something. Doesn't seem like a big deal. You buy 10 of them on Amazon and put them up. They make them with a 10-year battery now. You don't have to do anything. If the house is occupied, meaning there's people in the house and they have refrigerators running and things like that, internet, we're probably not going to check all your GFCIs, all your AFCI breakers. Why? Because we're going to trip stuff. Things are going to go off on people. They're going to lose their mind because their internet went out and they're in the middle of a Zoom call, or their freezer with their venison is going to go out and the GFCI won't reset. I can't tell you how many times we had to run an extension cord across the garage because the GFCI wouldn't reset because they plugged the deep freeze into a GFCI, which you probably shouldn't do. So those are kind of things that you'll want to ask, you want to talk about, and you want to pay attention to. If they didn't check AFCIs and GFCIs, say, listen, when you're moving out, we want to check those. So can we have those all checked? Meaning, wait till they're out of the house, or ask the owner, hey, can we check the GFCIs and AFCIs? If the owner's there, we'll ask, hey, can I trip your breakers? I mean, it sounds AFCI breakers, GFCI breakers. Because I don't want them losing the internet. I mean, they could have been working on a spreadsheet for a week or a program, and now I just crashed it on them, so we have to be careful as inspectors with that kind of stuff. So it isn't always what we want to do, what we can't do. It's, there's limitations at times, and unfortunately that's the truth. And then the last thing is look at what they didn't inspect and why. And then figure out, if you talk to your agency, if you need to get some other specialist out there, if they're recommending an engineer or, further evaluation. That's the one we use quite a lot. A lot of times we may not have the time to disassemble something and say, hey, the AC is working, but not as well as it should. And you might want to have it further evaluated. Sometimes it's just low on freon. Sometimes it's dirty. Sometimes we can't tell and it's just not working. Sometimes the ductwork is damaged and we can't see it. So heed those warnings, follow those warnings, and have a conversation with your agent and your inspector, and to see if that is something you need to address before you close your due diligence, because that's important. You don't want to be stuck in a deal that you're not happy with. So, and don't panic when you get your report, because a lot of people do, especially new home buyers. They panic immediately. I'm like, don't panic, breathe. Okay, have a conversation with your agent. Call the inspector with questions. Call the inspector. Go over the report. We don't mind doing it. Most 90% of the time, you could call my office or somebody there, and they'll answer the question for you right away, and you're done. Great. We'd rather you ask now than buy something you didn't like, or skip on a house you wanted, you were in love with, and now you think you got this awful report, and now you're panicking because you're afraid of getting into this house and it's too much for you. Well, talk to the inspector. Come up with some estimates, maybe. Idea what it takes to fix. If somebody built the house, somebody broke the house, somebody can fix the house. It's not a problem. It happens all the time. So, like anything else, there's maintenance that need to be done. There's always people that are deferred maintenance. Your car needs to be washed, oil needs to be changed, your transmission needs to be flushed. You need new tires once in a while. You need to change the brakes. It's just things that's the way it is. But you can kind of get an idea, And most of that stuff you can, if you've never owned a home, you can learn to do yourself or get an idea what it costs to do it. And then maybe you factor that into, buying this house or, hey, yeah, a house this age is going to have this, this, and this. And your agent may say to you, that's what you're going to get for this kind of market and where you're at. And where, you want to live beachside, you're going to get an older house, period. End of story. It's going to be an older house. Um, so, you want new construction, you're going to deal with new construction stuff. I could go on for days about that, but new construction is not perfect either. So, um, again, check your reputations online, ask your agent, ask your friends, do your research ahead of time so that way when the time comes, you're ready to jump on it because you only have a limited time to do your due diligence for your inspections. And you want to get those as soon as you can. Some of the worst inspectors are free all the time. There's a reason for that. Some of the best inspectors are full all the time. There's a reason for that. So you really kind of want to do your research and say, okay, even ask the inspectors or their company, how long will it take to get my appointment? I mean, how many days are you booking out, and how long will it take to inspect the house? A lot of times, we send more than one inspector, and so we do it quite a bit faster than a lot of them because there's more than one person, but not in half the time. There's two. We wind up spending a little more time doing the inspection. We just prefer it that way. Um, for our own sanity and to make sure that we're getting you everything you need to buy the house. And of course, if you have a large house, somebody was telling me the other day they're 7,500 square feet, and they did it by themselves and they were worn out by the end. Well, we don't like to do that. We like to send a few inspectors because it does take about an hour per 1,000 square foot. I have another video about that up. So anyway, I hope that helps, and I hope that helps answer some questions about hiring an inspector, looking for an inspector, and again, your agent should have a good idea for you, but always check. Um, you know, Not every agent wants the best inspector because the best inspector creates road bumps and blocks to closing, and not every agent understands what a good inspector can do. So, uh, but when you have a good inspector, they're going to have you more information, more details, and you don't want it to come over as overwhelming or shocking. So, being prepared for that certainly does help. So, I hope this helps. And let me know in the comments if you have any questions, any thoughts, or you thought I missed anything, or was I way off base? I'd love to hear it. Thanks.